Good evening, it's 8 p.m. local time here in the Polish capital, Warsaw. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and you're watching World News Tonight. Multiple motions have been filed by Poland's defense ministry against the former Law and Justice administration concerning the operation of the Smolensk investigative committee. We'll have more on that in a bit, but first, tonight's headlines. In Ukraine's assessment of the BRICS summit, Moscow's attempts have failed again. The Polish Prime Minister visits Belgrade and emphasizes that without Serbia, the European Union will not be complete. Orban has a reason to worry. He's losing in the polls and the opposition is mobilizing thousands in marches. Poland's defense ministry is filing 41 motions with the prosecutor against former officials from the Law and Justice administration. The allegations concern the operation of the Smolensk investigative subcommittee. According to current Polish defense minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, the subcommittee's primary goal was not to solve the case of the air disaster that saw the Polish presidential plane crash in 2010. Its true purpose was to confirm only one hypothesis, which argued the plane was brought down by an explosion. The issue has been one of the biggest rifts in present-day Polish society. Marek Steele reports.
April 10th, 2010. A day etched in the minds of the people of Poland. That fateful Saturday, a plane carrying Polish President Lech Kaczyński, his wife and 94 other passengers crashed near an airport in Smolensk, western Russia. The delegation was scheduled to attend memorial events for the Katyn massacre, which saw Soviet Russia murder thousands of Polish officers in World War II. But the passengers never made it.
The crash occurred as a result of exceeding the minimum altitude allowed by regulations during descent in conditions that did not allow visual reference with the ground and starting the go-around procedure too late.
The cause of the crash established by the Smolensk investigative committee was not enough for the then conservative opposition.
We were not in such a polarized situation before Smolensk. Smolensk is the beginning of a big battle within Poland among tribes.
Since 2010, law and justice politicians led by Antoni Macierewicz have argued that the disaster was actually caused by an explosion. After he became defense minister, Macierewicz established his own subcommittee to investigate the crash.
Not only did no experts with a proven track record in investigating air accidents sit on the subcommittee, expert reports commissioned from actual specialists were either classified or their conclusions were manipulated.
Today, the efforts of the subcommittee were summarized by the current defense ministry.
These 800 pages of the report also form the basis on which to take disciplinary measures and open legal proceedings. Reports to the prosecutor's office based on this document will be drafted and submitted by the ministry.
Out of 41 motions to the prosecutor's office in the case, 24 are against Antoni Macierewicz. They allege overreach of authority, negligence and forgery.
24 motions filed with the prosecutor's office. This is how it ends for the architect of Smolensk nightmare, provocateur and notorious liar, Antoni Macierewicz. It was Macierewicz who, at the behest of Jarosław Kaczyński, unleashed what amounted to nearly a civil war that engulfed the entire country for years. Crime and punishment.
Former Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak is accused of negligent supervision.
All of us here in Poland should spare no effort to explain this tragic event, explain it down to the smallest detail, countering Russian propaganda, in order to reveal the whole truth. And this is what this subcommittee tried to do.
Macierewicz's subcommittee ultimately failed to confirm its primary hypothesis, that the aircraft was brought down by an explosion.
I don't think that sending Macierewicz or just starting a trial will be something that will end the fight. I think that an interest of Kaczyński party is to make Macierewicz a martyr.
The polarization gripping Poland is clear at the monument to the victims of the Smolensk tragedy. Jostling between Law and Justice party leader Jarosław Kaczyński and his opponents can to this day be seen nearly every 10th day of the month, which marks the disaster's monthly anniversary.
The final day of the BRICS summit has drawn to a close. The leaders of emerging economies gathered in the bloc, now representing nearly half of the world's population, highlighted growing dissatisfaction with Western-dominated financial structures, as well as sanctions imposed on Russia. Jeremy Hołodniuk has more.
The third and final day of the summit gathered leaders of the BRICS countries and the bloc's aspiring members. The Russian leader accused the West of trying to stem the growing power of the global South with what he called perverse methods.
One example of this is Ukraine, which has been used to create strategic threats for Russia, ignoring at the same time our vital interests, their concerns, and infringement of rights of Russian-speaking people.
Much attention at the summit was dedicated to the war in Ukraine and the Middle East, though there were no signs that anything specific would be done to end either conflict.
We should come forward together to form a stabilizing force for peace, strengthen global security governance, and explore solutions to hotspot issues.
Appearing alongside BRICS leaders at the summit, which was criticized by Ukraine and some observers, UN Secretary General Antonio Gutterz called on the Russian leader to agree on peace deal.
We need peace in Ukraine, a just peace in line with UN Charter, international law and General Assembly resolutions.
All participants released a joint final statement called the Kazan Declaration, which touched on a wide range of issues. But some believe that Putin failed in gaining support for Moscow's policies.
Russia failed, to unite the global South and its allies like China, India, and other nations around its view of ending the war and its ambitions to gain even more and more Ukrainian territories.
BRICS, an idea developed 2 decades ago to describe the growing economic clout of China and other major emerging markets, is now a major bloc that accounts for 45% of the world's population and 35% of the global economy. The summit was attended by leaders or representatives of 36 countries. Some voices perceive it as a failure of US-led efforts to isolate Russia over its actions in Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin.
The South Korean and Polish presidents have jointly condemned the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia. Western countries are worried that these troops might soon be sent to the front lines in Ukraine. Krzysztof Panek has this next report.
Poland's Andrzej Duda and South Korea's Yoon Suk-yeol issued a statement after their talks held in Seoul. The war in Ukraine was an important issue for Poland, but a distant one for South Korea. With the news of North's soldiers possibly deploying to Ukraine, the war has become Seoul's issue as well.
We agreed that North Korea's dispatch of troops to Russia is a direct violation of UN Security Council resolutions and the UN Charter and is a provocation that goes beyond the Korean Peninsula and Europe to threaten global security.
Warsaw and Seoul established closer military ties in light of the war in Ukraine. South Korea sold significant amounts of arms to Poland as it seeks to rapidly improve its defense capabilities. Talks about further purchases are ongoing.
The weapons produced by South Korean companies will be connected with Polonization of the equipment, which is produced for the Polish army by Korean companies, and we hope this Polonization will be at least partially taking place in Poland.
US officials say that the possible deployment of North Korean troops to Ukraine shows Russia's problems in securing sufficient manpower.
This is an indication that he may be even in more trouble than most people realize. But again, he went tin-cupping early on to get additional weapons and materials from DPRK and then from Iran. And now he's making a move to get more people.
Pyongyang has previously sent ammunition, missiles and some combat vehicles to Russia. Deployment of North Korean soldiers to Russia shows that the ties between the two countries are growing. On Thursday, the Russian parliament unanimously adopted a treaty of partnership with North Korea, which contains a mutual defense clause.
The fourth article of the document provides for mutual military assistance in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter and in accordance with the legislation of Russia and North Korea.
The deployment of an estimated 3,000 North Korean soldiers to Ukraine has not yet been confirmed. Should it happen, Seoul has indicated it may provide arms to Ukraine. South Korea's robust defense industry could prove significant advantage to Kyiv, likely more important than a handful of North's troops.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and his Greek counterpart Kyriakos Mitsotakis have taken a few days out of their busy schedules to visit Serbia, a country which has been patiently waiting for EU accession since 2009. Despite its positive intentions, the visit has already drawn scrutiny for both officials, as Serbia never imposed sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Franciszek Pilis has more.
As more and more Balkan countries seek EU accession, European leaders find themselves visiting countries like Serbia, Albania and North Macedonia. The EU has also made an effort to make those countries feel wanted in the bloc, with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen going on a tour of the Balkans this week. The same goes for the Prime Ministers of Poland and Greece, who came to Belgrade to show the EU's support for Serbia's efforts to join the European Union. But these efforts don't seem to line up with Serbia's moves on the eastern side of the map.
Because yesterday in the evening, President Vučić was giving a dinner, an informal dinner for Prime Minister Tusk and Prime Minister Mitsotakis. So probably they have talked about the EU, Serbian integration and so on and so forth. And in that very same moment, the Serbian Deputy Prime Minister Vulin was giving a declaration to RIA Novosti that Serbia wants to join BRICS.
This behavior highlights the main disconnect between Serbia and other EU countries, as Belgrade isn't exactly on board with moving away from Russia. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has also reportedly talked with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin over the phone in the past few days, reiterating Belgrade's friendship with Moscow. Prime Minister Tusk's visit to Belgrade has sparked controversy among Europeans, who don't see Serbia as a reliable partner due to its ties to Russia. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, however, says he sees a way forward for Serbia and other Balkan countries to join the EU in the future. According to him, talking to Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has opened his eyes to Belgrade's stance and believes there is a way to form a coherent foreign policy shared by Serbia and the EU.
We understand each other well, and we also understand why we have different views on relations with Russia. However, what makes me appreciate this understanding more is the humanitarian help Serbia has provided to Ukraine, and the fact that we can openly talk about the situation on Poland's eastern border.
Another aspect of Serbia's EU ambitions is its efforts to push its economy forward. Despite recent economic growth, Serbia is still one of the poorest former Yugoslavian nations, and joining the EU would tremendously help with its development. Despite the differences between Serbia and the EU and Serbia's struggling economy, Belgrade remains a very lucrative partner for EU countries due to its vast reserves of lithium, used to create rechargeable batteries. Securing its place in the EU would give the bloc access to roughly 17% of all lithium reserves on the continent.
Viktor Orban is facing the most serious threat to his 14-year rule so far. A new poll shows his party is now trailing the opposition, and over 10,000 supporters of the pro-EU TISA party rallied in Budapest on Wednesday on the anniversary of the 1956 anti-Soviet uprising and chanted, "We are not afraid." Aisha Bachi has more.
During the commemoration of the 1956 anti-Soviet uprising, Péter Magyar, the leader of the TISA party, criticized Prime Minister Orbán for tarnishing Hungary's legacy of freedom and its constitution.
Viktor Orbán has no authority to talk about neutrality. He has no authority to betray the heritage of 1956. He has no authority to serve Russian interests.
The same day, Orbán accused the EU of trying to establish a puppet state in Hungary. He also urged Hungarian citizens to defy Brussels like they confronted the Soviet army in 1956.
We will not tolerate to be made a puppet state again, a servant of Brussels. They will not succeed. They will not break through here. We will win and they will lose.
Following the end of the Cold War, Hungary decided that it really wanted to join the European Union. And in fact, Mr. Orban was one of the advocates of that policy. Nobody forced Hungary to join the EU.
Orban currently faces a serious threat to his rule from Péter Magyar. The leader of the pro-European opposition TISA party continues to win over voters by calling out the corruption linked to the Hungarian government.
We need a change for a more livable country. In my personal opinion, we have had enough of this Fidesz era. What they are doing now is really obnoxious.
Hours before the Prime Minister's speech, a fresh poll indicated that TISA has the support of 42% of Hungarian voters, with Orbán's Fidesz party lagging behind at 40%.
It is the first poll since 2010, so for the last 14 years, showing that the opposition is ahead of Mr. Orban. So that clearly gives him a cause for some anxiety, I guess. Magyar is galvanizing enough support, unlike anybody else before him, to end the rule of Mr. Orban.
The next national elections in Hungary are scheduled for early 2026.
This Saturday, Georgians will cast their votes in what experts deem a future-defining election. The pivotal parliamentary vote will determine whether this Caucasus country will move closer to the European Union or lean towards Russia. Ovidiusz Nicea has our report.
Many Georgians see Saturday's vote as the most important one in a generation.
This is a decisive vote for Georgia on the crossroads between European path and path to be dominated by Russia.
It is crucial that everyone goes to the polls to cast their ballot, whoever they vote for.
The ruling, Russo-friendly Georgian Dream is facing 4 separate pro-European parties that promise to form a coalition after the election. There are pro-government and pro-opposition polls that suggest totally different outcomes. The pro-European camp is hopeful that after 12 years in power, the Georgian Dream can now be defeated.
Right now, the polling indicates that these opposition parties shall be able to get enough votes, more than the ruling pro-Russian party, and eventually form the government.
While the pro-European opposition says these elections will see Georgians choose between the EU and Russia, the ruling Moscow-leaning Georgian Dream says the choice is between war and peace.
Internal enemies are trying to open a second front in Georgia, drag the country into war and bring a rain of fire on our cities, villages and our children.
We do not see any positive agenda offered by the ruling team. We see only the toxic statements. If you do not vote for us, there will be war in Georgia. The second front will be opened and Georgia will be dragged into war by the so-called global war party. Nobody knows what does it mean.
In recent years, under Georgian Dream's rule, the European prospect has been drifting away from Georgia. The passing of the Foreign Agents Bill, modeled after a similar Russian law, has not only caused massive protests, but also prompted the EU to halt the country's accession process. Opinion polls are showing that 80% of Georgians want to join the EU. Despite the figures, experts say the Kremlin will seek to derail the European integration of Tbilisi.
We will observe different kind of Russian interference in Georgia. I am afraid that results from Moldova are kind of bad signal for different societies. This is a signal that even in Moldova, Western is becoming weaker and the pro-Russian emotions are rising.
Experts predict that regardless of the elections' outcomes, protests on the streets of Georgia might be inevitable.
The situation in Azerbaijan, violations of human rights and international law, relations with Armenia, as well as China and Taiwan, these issues were topping the agenda for the European Parliament today. There were debates, but also resolutions. Our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach tells us more from Brussels.
Human rights and fairness, those were the main themes here at the European Parliament as lawmakers here voted on 2 final resolutions. The plenary has come to a close. First one very much about Azerbaijan. Remember, that will be a country hosting the UN Climate Conference COP29 in just a few weeks' time. Very much that resolution passed overwhelmingly, but that contained within very much a criticism of Baku, criticism against also its policy against Armenia, calling for more human rights, more respect for that. that. So that will be noticed in Baku, and the hope here is by certain parliamentarians that also the Commission will take notice of that. And also key is looking further into Asia, and another resolution here, namely about China and its one China policy, and especially looking at Taiwan. Now remember, it was the first time this week historically that a commissioner actually spoke out in favor of Taiwan, very much speaking that China should do more to respect and not take any unilateral action, any provocative action, no military action against Taiwan. So that's historic. So coupled with that, it's not the first time resolution here passed, which also was a positive sign here, and those hopeful that more will be done on the European Union level looking towards China and Taiwan. So two things very much key here as the end of the plenary, as the session wraps up, but two wins also for democracy and human rights. Natasha Farbach for TVP World in Strasbourg.
The BRICS summit, which brought over a dozen world leaders to Russia, has come to an end. The meeting, which was supposed to show the West that it did not manage to isolate Russia over its war in Ukraine, seems to have backfired. To discuss the aftermath of the summit and its possible outcomes, I'm joined by Daniel Hamilton, president of the Transatlantic Leadership Network. Good evening and welcome to the program. Good evening. Good to be with you. The BRICS summit, as we're looking at it now, we're looking back at the past 2 days. We know that Russia claims it's proven that the West failed to isolate it over the war in Ukraine. In your opinion, was it a hit or a miss?
Oh, I think it's a miss. I think it's important that for Putin to show that world leaders will come and meet with him, even though he's indicted and he should be arrested. But if he stays in Russia, of course, that doesn't happen. But otherwise, all of his goals, I don't think he got many goals. I don't think the summit itself, if you read the declaration, really achieved much of anything. More important were the meetings on the sidelines. Your reporting just noted the North Korea-Russia arrangements that are, I think, concerning to us. India and China agreed to settle, or at least lower the temperature on their own border disputes. That is potentially significant because India and China are the main countries in the BRICS that are really at loggerheads with each other. So, and the fact that Turkey's president showed up, Turkey, a NATO member, showed up at the BRICS, and actually he wants to have Turkey join the BRICS, that's, I think, somewhat troubling. But there were no real results of the meeting, and I think that shows that this is sort of just a posturing and doesn't really, the group doesn't usually produce much. One of the main discussions during the BRICS summit focused on, so to speak, dethroning the American dollar. And we heard from Vladimir Putin, who said that the U.S. is using its currency as a political weapon. And he basically announced that he would be interested in establishing an alternative to dollar-based international payment system. Is such a global financial revolution possible? I don't think so. If you look at the role of the dollar today, it's just as robust as it's been for decades. The only other currencies that people use in the world are the euro, or the Swiss franc, or the Japanese yen, or the British pound. The Chinese currency is not convertible, so it can't be an alternative until China would make it convertible on world markets, which would open up its system to an extent that would challenge the Communist Party's rule. The ruble is really, kind of a joke. And there was no support even among the BRIC leaders for Putin's idea. That idea has been around for a long time. At every BRICS meeting, they talk about this, but nothing ever comes of it. How feasible do you think it is to actually formalize BRICS institutionally, to be able to create a proper trading bloc with a different currency? It's not really. These countries really have not much in common. You have democracies like India, and then you have autocracies like Russia and China. And as I say, many of them have real problems with each other. So they don't really, they don't really do much with each other. The main trading partners of almost all of those countries are actually the United States and Europe. So I really don't see much coming of this. It's really a posturing, trying to portray this notion of the so-called multipolar world as sort of an alternative to the Western alliance. But you see, it doesn't come anything. Take Ukraine, for instance. They couldn't agree at all on anything on Ukraine, and they never have, because there's just no common ground.
In his declaration, the BRICS expressed their commitment to the established order of the purpose and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. With Russia's aggression of Ukraine and with all these leaders accepting the invitation to Kazan, hybrid warfare, imperialistic tendencies, and these countries entering this summit, who are they actually trying to fool by saying that they support the established order by the UN?
Well, you'd have to ask them. I don't, we all agree, I think, on the principles of the United Nations. This is how some countries implement them, where we, of course, disagree, including Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which is a clear violation of the UN Charter and its basic principles. So some of this, just as we would say in the United States, doesn't pass the laugh test. They really... these statements really are hollow. They don't really mean a whole lot. So I wouldn't put much stock in it. I think, as I said, what's more important is what happened on the margin, some bilateral arrangements that went forward. It's also important to think about who isn't there. I noticed on the map you showed earlier in your show, you show Argentina as part of the BRICS, but Argentina has said it doesn't want to be part of the BRICS. You take a country like Indonesia, which has decided not to join the BRICS. They want to join the OECD, the Western Economic Club. So you have a country like Indonesia and Argentina. They're not fooled by this. Because essentially the BRICS is going to be a China club. The fact that Putin was hosting it is fine, but really it's about China and its weight and a group of countries that would be aligned with China. India is the main country blocking that at the moment. Brazil also not totally thrilled about that idea. So if you see the BRICS moving toward more Chinese orientation, then I think that's something to worry about. But at the moment, Russia has become a client of China. It's a junior partner and now becoming increasingly dependent on China. And the BRICS framework just camouflages that. And I don't think they produce anything.
One of the big surprises was the appearance of Antonio Gutterz, the UN Secretary General. It was widely criticized, especially when it comes to Kyiv. As they said, I quote, "Accepting an invitation from a war criminal is exactly what he did. Russia does not keep up with UN's rules." What was Gutterz actually trying to achieve by calling for peace and attending the summit?
Well, again, it's hard to know what he was trying to achieve. I would imagine the UN Secretary General wants to be seen as, working on peace negotiations. There was both the Middle East issues and the war against Ukraine, and he appeared there. But again, I agree with the comment that to take an invitation from an indicted alleged war criminal, which has to go through the UN-related process, is really kind of a contravention of the UN's own principles. So I understand his outreach for peace, but he knows the BRICS summit will never achieve anything on Ukraine. So I think it was a mistake for him to go.
And finally, last but not least, considering the meeting of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and then Ursula von der Leyen with Mr. Vučić and his absence during BRICS, where he sent his representatives who are on the American list of sanctions, do you think that there's a chance that Serbia might be actually getting closer to the EU rather than Russia?
I think Serbia plays the game. It's a hedger. It hedges its bets. It tries to it doesn't fall for one camp or the other. It's trying to extract maximum advantage for itself. I think what you've seen in recent years, the United States and the European Union have tried to pull Serbia away from its associations with China and Russia, and they now see Serbia as the key to sort of stabilizing the whole Balkans. Of course, that was very different years ago. But Vučić is playing, a game. He's hoping to get a huge amount of EU money because that's what's really at stake for him. He sent some ministers to the BRICS meeting, so he's playing that. He toys with China. China, as you know, there was a major meeting of Chinese and Vučić some months ago. So he's trying to do what he can. It's just like the other countries I mentioned in the BRICS. They're all trying to be unaligned because that maximizes their maneuvering room, they believe. They don't want to be locked into one camp or the other. And I think we all in the West, we need to pay attention to those countries and engage more with them and work with them to see the advantages they could have of working with the United States, with the EU, with NATO, some of them, and be part of the global, financial architecture, the global trading system, because their main key economic partners are going to be Europe and the United States, not each other.
Diplomacy and international relations, always the name of the game. Daniel Hamilton, the president of Transatlantic Leadership Network, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight, but please stay with us here on TVP World for more news and features, as we'll be back with you very soon.